next speaker, our keynote speaker, is it's coming down to this theme that we're talking about, but it's also something a bit different and something that's been a challenge and quite some extremes in Sally's world. But I met Sally before. Prior to then, Sally was the crocodile chick. I hope you don't mind me saying that. And but Sally did an agriculture degree in Sydney, and which took her down an unexpected path, which was into crocodiles. And with that, Sally went up, did a PhD, and was recruited to Darwin Crocodile Farm, and then subsequently a company, which is the Centre for Crocodile Research. I'm very interested to hear what Sally's got to say, and thank you very much for coming to speak with us. Welcome, Dr. Sally Isberg.
Anyone who just saw me do that can see how much I'm shaking. This is such a big forum and I'm clearly out of my league a little bit. But I've wet my throat now. I see in the brochure this is talking about lessons that I can give you, and I think this is much more from my perspective about what I've learnt from your industry and I'm applying in a completely new industry. And I was speaking to Heather just before, wherever she is, and I think she summed it up the best, that we're learning from each other. So when I was putting together this presentation, I couldn't help but get a little bit of a dig in. My species eats your species. So we've got a big feral pig population in the Northern Territory, and our animals are clearly thriving off some of the ferals that are involved. But really what this is about is intensification. What are the dramas that we're facing together? Intensive animal husbandry is just that, you know, same problems, different industries. But just to let you know that I'm not completely and utterly out of my depths when it comes to pig farming and pig husbandry. My husband grew up on Baconsfield farm in Bullsbrook, and his brother actually moved to the Northern Territory to he was on the croc farm. He was managing the croc farm that I eventually did my PhD on. So my husband, who's a geologist, went to Darwin, and then I went to Darwin on work experience, and we fell in love. So and there is a bit of a story there, because before Stuart, my husband's brother, went to Janamba Croc Farm, where he was manager. The industry was predominated by zoologists. It was all about getting animals from the wild, I'll talk about that in a second, and putting them in captivity and seeing what worked and what didn't work. But no one had an agricultural background to it, a producer background, a farming background. And I really feel that Stuart's knowledge actually revolutionised the industry a lot, because he started collecting data. He started hygiene regimes, exactly what he'd learnt from his dad, Ian Barker, at Baconsfield growing up. But I'm going to take us a big step backwards, and the croc industry has some very different starting points from the pig industry. And a quote by Winston Churchill, this is one of my favourites: "I avow with what regrets may be necessary an active hatred of these brutes and a desire to kill them." And this really encapsulates where the crocodile industry stemmed from. That when an especially brainy primate began throwing harpoons and spears at them, the crocodiles gave about as good as they received and made such an impression they were accorded sacred status in many places. And the crocodile still has sacred status with a lot of Indigenous communities around the world, and particularly within our Indigenous communities up north. Their existence only became really endangered when the female primates became enamoured with the crocodile's scaly skins and induced the males to go after the reptiles. We liked the pattern of the skins, and we got you blokes to kill them for us. That's ultimately what that's saying. But it was then done with such unfair equipment as high-velocity rifles, spotlights and motorboats. What that ultimately all means is that the crocodile industry started from the obliteration of wild populations around the world, not just in Australia. You can see here there's some of our Indigenous... Sorry, I'm really sorry for the guys on the right-hand side of the room. It's natural for me to go to the left, and I've got the pointer here, so I'm hoping that you're going to be able to follow this. You can see some hunters here. I think I've counted 5 animals in this top slide here. Another guy's skinning, and I think I've counted about 21 animals along there. That's clearly not sustainable harvesting from any wild population. Women did it too. So this graph here shows where the crocodile population was before unregulated hunting. There was an estimated 150,000 non-hatchling animals in the wild. And then after the Second World War, hunting was just unprecedented, unregulated, and you can see a massive decline in the saltwater crocodile population. And it got down to an estimated 3,000 individuals left in the wild. This graph, by the way, is only the Northern Territory population. Queensland monitor their crocodiles in a completely different way, which we won't get into today, or not. So you know, there's some major genetic bottlenecking there for the geneticists in the room as well, but that's a really low population base to start any industry off. For the first couple of years, yes, there was after hunting stopped, which in the Territory was 1972, there was an increase in the population. But there was no incentive to actually conserve the species. There was nothing going back into the natural populations. At the time when harvesting was stopped, all of the animals were put on what's called Appendix 1 of CITES. So if you think you've got regulatory issues, try dealing with the Convention of International Trade on Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna. Everything is permitted, everything is regulated. So when the animals were on Appendix 1, only captively bred animals could be traded, which therefore meant the wild populations had no value. No one was going to conserve them. Why would they? There's no money in it. Cattle producers were still losing their cattle to crocodiles, and so they would go out there and shoot them. So, because again, there was no economic incentive. So some really intelligent people started thinking, well, hang on, what happens if we started wild harvesting these eggs to hatch them in captivity? We're going to take away once we get to the economies of scale of actually being able to farm them in captivity, we're going to be able to do that faster than cheaper than going out and harvesting them in the wild. We're also going to give those animals a value. We're going to compensate landowners, and we're going to provide Indigenous economic incentives. So you can see there over the next couple of years, the population continued to incline, and the number of eggs that we were collecting out of the wild was fluctuating, but it continued to grow. We're now collecting 60,000 eggs per annum out of the wild. It's estimated that we could triple that, and we would still not have an impact on the wild population, and the numbers are actually up to pre-hunting levels. So in terms of a conservation success story, this sustainable use program has been a real worldwide gold standard, and we're constantly selling this back to sustainable use groups because from a conservation initiative we've given the animals value. So what does the Australian crocodile industry currently look like? There's 14 farms. We only farm the saltwater crocodile. The Johnstone River or the freshwater crocodile is much smaller, and I'll talk about skin quality traits in a second. There's about 185,000 production animals in captivity. The NT quota is actually 70,000 live eggs. And the Northern Territory farms collect about 70 to 100% from the wild. There is some captive breeding that goes on, and it's sort of just a bit of an insurance policy should the government ever say no longer are we going to do wild egg harvest, although that seems very unlikely. And then in Queensland, however, well, you steal all of our eggs. So basically, and that's okay, because again, we can quite easily sustain that in our population based on that last graph. But there's some farms here that still do pure captive breeding. The breeding stock obtained on the croc farms, though, is from problem crocodile removal. So this is out of Darwin Harbour, recreational areas, because I'll go into a second why that is, but what it basically means is we've got no domestication. Everything is from the wild, so even captive animals are still wild sourced, and then they just breed together in captivity, so not domesticated and not selected. So, as I've just said before, the benefits of this sustainable use wild egg harvest program is that we've recovered the wild population, there's Indigenous economic development, compensation to landowners for the loss of their stock. We're now putting a value on the habitat, so that's also conserved, and we've got an end-user demand that's supplied because producing in captivity, we can give them what they want a lot cheaper than going out in the wild to get them. But there is a disadvantage. And the biggest risk right now that we have in crocodile conservation is actually human-crocodile conflict. We've been so successful in our conservation strategies that humans and crocodiles around the world are now interacting in not necessarily negative ways. So we need to find some social demographics that can help us work out how to prevent these croc attacks, because we don't want to be, this isn't a good outcome for anyone either. But what is the crocodile skin industry? What actually is it? This is just a graph of the classic skin trade. Now, the classic skin trade is big skins that we can make into handbags and boots. There's also the non-classic skin trade, which where they make watch band straps, and there's about 2 million caimans a year produced. And there's also some American alligators that fit into that watch band market too. These statistics are all being derived from the CITES trade database, which is that convention I mentioned before, and they don't distinguish between alligators that go into the classic skin market versus the watch bands. Nile crocodiles are the second most produced, and we're down here at 7.4%. That's the saltwater crocodile. And there's a few other competing skins in there as well, such as the New Guinea crocodile, the Siamese crocodile, the American crocodile. So out of the saltwater crocodiles that are produced worldwide, we produce about 49% of those. So we're producing about 3.5% of the global world demand on the classic skin trade. Sorry, I'm actually just trying to integrate into my head here some stats that I was hearing about you guys today in the pork industry, and I believe that there's an oversupply issue that's going on. And I just wanted to actually try and integrate some of that data into what this graph here is all about as well, because we are also starting to suffer that same issue. I like to think of crocodile skin in the way that the supply is actually dictated as a skin pyramid. The actual top demanded product is the saltwater crocodile, which is what we produce. But what the tanneries want is first grade blemish-free skins. And that's important. I'll go into that a little bit later, what I'm talking about with blemish-free. But whatever they can't achieve in their demand for saltwater crocodiles, they then go to first-grade Nile crocodile skins. And whatever demand they can't fill out of that, they then saturate that with the American alligator. What we've actually got to a point at the moment since the global financial crisis, the industry actually grew through all of that, and it encouraged a lot more investment into the industry, probably about fourfold. What's happening now, though, is that the global economy has shrunk for luxury leather items, and the grading standards, so what I was just talking then about this blemish-free skin, the restrictions have actually gotten tighter, and so there's now a global glut. And particularly in the Nile crocodile skins, we're going to see a lot of producers not being able to sell their product. But why is the saltwater crocodile the most demanded? Why is it considered the luxury, the premium? We've got a really large belly skin, so from the collar to the cloaca, and within that area there's many more scale rows. So therefore, if you divide an area more, you're going to get a smaller scale, and that's got more aesthetic appeal. It's also got a very cross-hatch pattern, whereas the Nile crocodile and the American alligator are a bit more higgledy-piggledy. And also there's no osteoderms or bones in those belly scales, and that they produce a pitted appearance upon tanning, which is why the saltwater crocodile is the most revered. But where is it going? What are we aiming at? This is what we're aiming at. This Birkin bag, the Hermes Birkin bag, this particular example sold in May 2015 for $350,000 US. It was second-hand. Second-hand. All right, now it does help that it's got lots and lots of diamonds, but it's also got a Himalayan finish. So this is quite a unique finish. Normally a tan is a consistent colour across all of the belly scales. Now, After the global financial crisis, when most of us were in pain, the crocodile skin industry actually didn't feel that for about a year, and the luxury fashion market actually grew by 19%. So the really rich wanted to prove that they were still really rich. The waiting time for one of these bags is about 10 years. People put their grandchildren on the list, and there are about 19,000 produced every year. So when you bring that back to the stats I just showed you before, there are a lot more crocodile skins that are actually produced than ever make it to this market anyway. When the global financial crisis hit, the secondary markets, the Guccis of this world, that's where the market fell out at that level. They were all the people that were on margin calls and lost all their money. So these bags here are still returning about 10% growth per annum. So if anyone's got a spare 350 grand, go into a Hermes Birkins bag if you can lay your hand on one. So I've mentioned a lot about blemish-free. So this is what I spend 50% of my time working on right now. What is our end product? What are we doing? So we're 30 years into the farming of crocodiles, and I've spent the last 10 years looking at skin quality. So there was 20 years there, we didn't even have to worry about what we were producing. It was all just absorbed into the market. Now we are at the point where this little lesion right there, that can downgrade an entire skin. It is now worthless. So where did it come from? So when I harvested the animal, that's what it looked like. I couldn't see it. I can now because my eyes are really, really, really attuned, and there's actually a little dot right there. And if we go back to, if we go to this here, my apologies, it's a little bit out of focus, but this is actually the way the tanners now grade. Because you can't see it without a light shining through it from the underneath, they now put them on tables with lights shining underneath, and anything that has breached the basement membrane layer of the skin will show as a translucency. And over 50% of what shows as a translucency will show on the tanned product. So we as producers are struggling to identify on the live animal what we should and shouldn't be harvesting before, because we can't see it until we get it on the light table, and obviously that's post-slaughter. This is, I just want to give you a bit of a 3D shot here of what's going on. This is an electron microscopy slide. The slide on the left shows the normal collagen structure within a skin. So collagen is layered like this as thick bundles, and upon tanning, all of the fluid in between the collagen bundles is removed and it's compacted, and that is what adheres to the dye. However, you can see on the right-hand side here, where that little dot was before on that other scale, you can see how something's gotten in there. And through the healing process, there's been extra blood vessels, right? And then you know the skin's restructured itself. It has to, the animal has to continue to survive, but it's restructured in a higgledy-piggledy, lots of spindly ways. So again, when that ground substance between the collagen is removed, there's actually less density, and it actually concaves in, and it doesn't attract the dye as evenly. So we're now getting a really fundamental understanding of what's going on molecularly of our crocodile skins and how this is interacting at the tannery level. And this is just a picture here to show you this is actually why I was investigating this skin to begin with, was that lesion there, which didn't end up showing up. So I was chasing unicorns pretty much. But the other thing that's of interest is, can you see these two lines down here? Right, they were actually scratch marks, which, again, I didn't even identify at this layer. But when they were there on the light table, and you can subtly see them on the tan skin there as well. So these are the fine details that the tanneries are now going into upon the grading of our skins. So that's obviously our biggest challenge, is actually getting a product to market that is actually desirable. But some of the other issues that we've got are that we don't have any domestication. As I said, we have no idea when we collect a clutch of eggs, is that going to do well in captivity or is it not? They're carnivores, they're apex predators. So we don't have an issue of them, trying to eat each other, which is the first thing a lot of people think. But their eye tooth, their fourth tooth goes over the mandible. So as animals are sliding over the top of each other, they're scratching that keratin layer on their skin, and that can produce some of the linear lesions or lines, that I just showed you in the previous slide. They're ectotherms. Right, so they can't regulate their own metabolism. They have to behaviourally do that. So we need to supply them warmth during the cool times of the year. And I was just speaking to, I think it was David before, about we need to start thinking about heat stress, just like you guys do with your sows. They're also semi-aquatic. We have to give them land and water. The water needs to be deep enough to be able to submerge for them to be able to behaviourally express their normal behaviours according to the 5 freedoms. And then skin as the primary product. That's quite a unique thing within an industry. Our meat is worth 5% of our total production value. So 95% of our value is on the skin. So we need to make sure that that's exactly what we're producing, exactly what the tanneries need. As I said before, the industry is only 30 years old. We've come a long way, but the main focus at the moment has actually just been able to get the farms to an economy of scale that's economically viable. So that's been done a lot through hatchling recruitment and optimising of husbandry that will maximise our outputs and minimise our wastages. Again, as I said, we're now starting to really put a lot of effort into understanding our end product, but even just remaining solvent. That has been a major issue just because we're an emerging industry and we've got unique challenges that no one could really predict along the way. So I thought I'd just pick out a few of these and just talk a little bit about how certain aspects are affecting our industry, and hopefully you can find some relationships within these that fit into the pig industry. Again, we've got wild harvest, so there's no domestication, and I'm sure a lot of you would actually like to see a lot of genetic variation to this degree because you'd have so much to select for. But my PhD was actually to analyse all the data that Stuart Barker, that farm manager, had collected because of his pig husbandry background and to create a genetic improvement program. Now, unfortunately, it hasn't been adopted yet because it's just, I think, a bit too early for industry because it's again, wild harvest. We need to get into genomics more. But, we've got heritability rates for to get to age of harvest of 42%. Beautiful ability to be able to select off. And when we rank our crocodile breeding values, or our CBVs, we had about a year's difference between those pairs that are producing at their best versus those that are producing at their slowest. So, it wouldn't have taken a lot to be able to grab these breeding pairs and try and optimise a program in there. Remembering that these breeding pairs are wild crocodiles that have just been put together in a pen and bred. So there's no genetic selection there. This is actually quite representative of what a wild population, the genetic variation within a wild population would be. Our number of hatch rate, again, 42%, that was a repeatability because I don't have an F2 generation to be able to look at generational differences. And I can't remember what the stat is. There's about a 30 hatchlings difference in there. So some of our, compared to our baseline, which is about 30, we've got some producing 45 hatchlings and others producing significantly less. And again, that's a lot of genetic variation that we could be selecting off. And then our survivability as well. That's, I'll go and talk about this one a little bit more now. But so the hassles of not being able to have a genetic improvement program mean we miss out on all of that genetic gain. I have to deal with the slowest growers in the shed to the fastest growers in the shed. I'm putting them under the same husbandry regime. Is it a domestication thing? Is it a husbandry thing that I could optimise? We're trying a lot of scenarios. And this is probably the biggest extreme I can show you, which is runtism. Now, I always look at the pig literature for runting, because I know that runts are part of pigs. These animals are from exactly the same clutch and they're exactly the same age. About 10% of our population every year just never start eating. We've done some histopathology studies, and their corticosterone, their stress hormone levels, are through the roof. They're being farmed in exactly the same conditions as everything else. and their testosterone levels are a lot higher as well. So they will aggressively come up and try to protect their pen, but they're not eating. So they'll jump over food to try and have a go at you, but they just won't eat. Whereas this fat little sucker down here, he would just sit in the pen and look at you like, yep, just give me the next lot of food. So as I said, we have done a histopathology study, and there doesn't appear to be any pathological reason why this is occurring, and I believe it's genetic. So again, genomics. We need to get into genomic selection here, because I think that if we could do that at the point of hatch, then that would increase our production efficiency quite substantially. Getting rid of 10% of our growers that don't do anything and eventually die. This is a graph that just shows categorically where some of our risk factors are for our survivability traits. The first year is our crucial factor. Yours is to 65 days, is it? I think I just saw before. Runting, as I've just said, is our major mortality. But then we've also got these here. These are our no visible ailments. So you send them to the lab and nothing comes back. It's not a bacterial septicemia. There's no stress-related idea of what's going on there. But we've only just gotten into virus isolation. We've now developed cell lines that we can culture viruses on, and hopefully that will start to provide some clues of what could be underlying there. These other mortalities here, there's disease-related here, so these are ones that have actually been confirmed in the lab, and then stress-related ones up here. Now, stress-related ones are things that I've been able to categorise back to a failure in a hot water system, or a bung not holding, so the water draining out, or I've just moved the animals through a husbandry regime. So, we've minimised that over the years by implementing certain temperature profiles before we move them to cool them down, because, as I said, they're thermoregulatory. They're dictated by their external temperature. So if we can slow their metabolism down a little bit before we move them, we seem to get a much better survival rate after a husbandry move. And then the disease mortalities are mainly bacterial septicemias. They're ubiquitous things. They're happening at certain times of the year when the biomass within each pen is high. The diagnosis from the vet is it's stress-related. What's the stress? And it's stress-related. So, antibiotics come out at that point in time based on sensitivity testing. But I think we've got a lot more to learn in terms of our immune predictors, which you guys are so much more advanced on than what we are at this stage. But I'm using your technology, so keep going. Nutrition. Our babies are fed red meat that's fortified with vitamins and minerals. What do I say? This animal here is a runt, by the way. Remember I said just before, the animals that will come up and attack you, they won't eat themselves. But, I thought it was a good photo. He's got an evil look in his eye. So we're feeding a raw protein. That also means that we've got a whole heap of hygiene considerations. So we've got proteins, we've got fats, so we need to use chlorine-based detergents and scrubbing. It's very labour intensive to try and keep the pens as clean as we can without being sterile, because we do want to challenge the animals with these organisms that eventually they can succumb to bacterial septicemias. The older animals are fed chicken heads. We import them from either New South Wales or South Australia frozen at $2.20 a kilo, and we've just found out that they're about 60% water. So we're shipping water around the country for not a lot of nutritional value. So we're trying to work on artificial feeds. The Nile crocodile and the American alligator have pellets, like a pelletised soy-based diet. No, our saltwater crocodiles refuse to eat them. We've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, probably into millions now, trying to get these animals to eat a pelletised diet, which would obviously help with our cleaning regimes and reduce the need for chlorine-based detergents and probably some labour and various other bits, freezers for meat and the like. The vitamin mineral supplement that we add to it is a dog-based formula. It's been used for 30 years, so we just picked it up. And we decided we'd create our own a couple of years ago, and all we did was develop scours in our hatchlings. So we've gone back to the dog formula. So, again, there's a lot of tweaking there. Feed is about 40% of our production costs, and so we need to find ways to remain competitively advantaged, particularly towards countries that are in third world countries where their costs of production are a lot lower than ours, and we're competing directly against them. Biosecurity is one of the main, from a risk that the companies have identified, and it all comes down to culture. Trying to change the human culture when it comes to respecting biosecurity and disease risks is the largest hurdle. Trying to implement the actual, the theory behind the biosecurity, that's easy. But getting the people to respect it, live it and breathe it and change is being our largest hurdle. Again, we're drawing a lot off the pig and poultry and aquaculture industries and examples in there. Birds, because we're feeding raw meat, the raptors come in and grab it off the back of trailers. So basic things like covering the trailers with shades so that the birds can't do that. And mosquitoes. We've just got a really large grant for investigating mosquito-borne viruses. This lesion right there is actually transmitted by mosquitoes, and birds are an amplifier. So if an infected mosquito bites a bird that becomes viremic and another mosquito then bites it and then bites our crocodile's eyes or nose, it sounds disgusting, but that's the only place that they can bite them, then they get riddled with these lesions here, which is actually apparently an allergic reaction. So we're starting to go into vaccine development, and there's no actual vaccines for crocodilians. So we're in a really new world. There's one there's a killed West Nile virus vaccine that's used for horses that's been implemented in alligators with arguable success. So we're now working with University of Queensland, La Trobe and ANU to see if we can actually get something that will protect our animals, just like you guys vaccinate. Obviously, movement between areas, again, it's back to culture. It's just about getting staff to actually respect and understand what's going on here. The whole philosophy of, well, we haven't had an outbreak in 30 years, so we don't need to worry about it, that's just not appropriate. There was a farm back in 2006 who lost 96% of their hatchling stock to chlamydia, and they believe that it was actually walked in from one other area of the farm. Animal welfare would be the other 50% of the work that I do. I will say that the group of farms that I consult to have a really strong corporate social responsibility policy, that they not only present for lip service to their shareholders, they actually live it and breathe it. And I think that that's a wonderful thing, because what we've seen so far with crocs is that when you've got your animal welfare up to speed, you've actually got your productivity up to speed as well. So they're actually synergistic, they're not antagonistic. So it makes sense to me completely and utterly to understand more about our animal welfare needs. The Code of Practice was put out in 2009. But it was all based on the economics. So as I said, we had zoologists looking at how many crocs in a pen, stocking densities, and that they wrote these codes of practice based on what the best survivability was in a pen, or what they thought was best. Well, I'm now going back through and I'm actually challenging that and saying I want scientific evidence to say this is what is appropriate. One of the areas that's received a lot of criticism is in the final stages of production, we house crocs individually. That's so that they can heal any blemishes that are on their skins. And animal activist groups have said, well, hang on, farming any animal individually is cruel. Now, we needed to prove this scientifically. Well, is it or is it not? In the wild, saltwater crocs at a particular size become quite solitary. So as long as we're putting them in the pens when they're at that stage, then is that really such an unethical thing? And we actually were able to show that it's not. There was no difference between communally housed and individually housed animals at exactly the same size. Again, by going back through and challenging the Code of Practice guidelines, we were able to actually show and quantify whether those Code of Practice guidelines were appropriate or not. I've just held a seminar with the local producers, my clients, to get them to understand their final product from a 3D level. I needed to get farmers to stop thinking just about what they were seeing on the superficial layer and start understanding more about what was going on at the 3D layer of their skin. This is their final product. They need to understand what's going on. So the basic outcomes were that, just using histological slides, this is the full depth of the crocodile skin, and this is the epidermis here, and this is the basement membrane. And the ultimate rule is that if something breaches that basement membrane, that's permanent damage, that's collagen restructure. And that's important because during tanning, this top epidermal layer is removed. So it's only what's left. This is the tan skin here, sorry. And this is our full profile raw skin. So that top epidermal layer is all removed. So of course, if something's breached the basement membrane on this slide here, it's also going to be shown on the raw skin. So just getting them to think about when they're grading their skins, how deep has a lesion gone? Has it gone through to the basement membrane? If it has, then it's potentially restructured the collagen. And at that point in time, that's when they need to make their decision of whether we persevere with this animal or we don't. This is just an example of a particular scale which I tracked through. I tracked it through for 1 month after it went in single pens and then 3 months afterwards. And I wanted to get it to the point where it had healed. For all intents and purposes, it had healed. And it's terrible now because I can actually see it right there because my knowledge has progressed quite a lot more. But at that time, I couldn't actually see that lesion there until I put it on the light table. And again, histopathology has become now my major tool in showing my producers what's going on. So this is an H&E stain and this is a Mason's trichrome stain. These were taken one slice after another. And you can see here, so the big collagen bundles that I spoke about before, you can see here where that blemish is, it's finer, it's more spindly, and there's also more ground substance. So the white that's between the pink there, that's ground substance, and it will all be removed through the tanning process, causing that collapse, which will end up showing on that final product. And then you can actually see a lymphocyte structure come in on the Mason's trichrome. As I said, that was just one cut away, but that's, obviously the blemish changes as you cut through different layers. As part of that mosquito vaccine grant that I just spoke about, we're also looking at pox virus. And pox virus, I believe there's a swine pox virus as well. I'm not exactly sure how much of an economic consequence it is on your industry. But unlike the mosquito-borne virus, this one doesn't actually penetrate through the basement membrane. You can see this is an active lesion here. And you can see the amount of viral replication that's going on there. But all it's doing is actually compressing the collagen that's underneath. So once the pox virus has been released out into the environment, it produces this little pit here as it's healing. And you can see here on the histology slide, there's no restructuring of the collagen underneath. And there's a clear pitting here that's represented throughout the epidermis. But it will eventually heal, but it extends our production life by 6 to 12 months. The farm who gets the majority of these has the fastest growth rate. So he could probably get his animals out at harvest size by about 2 years of age. But because of pox virus, he has to keep his animals another 6-12 months, which puts him on the average of every other farm, which is about 3 years. So the advantages he's getting through various aspects of his farming to improve his growth rate, he's then losing because of this virus, which is why we've decided on the vaccine strategy. But I think the one thing that this industry has definitely changed within its image is that this is no longer about brute strength against animals, We've become a really compassionate industry who wants to be proactive when it comes to animal welfare, understanding our product and making sure that our product can meet its end goals, because otherwise we fall into an ethical conundrum if our animals can't meet their end product, their end market goals. So thank you, everyone. Thanks to Pat and Ashley for inviting me here today, and my many collaborators over the years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sally. I think we've got some time for some questions, provided you're happy to take some questions, Sally, but I might just ask the first one. I mean, particularly when you're talking about the genetic improvement potential, what about if we're at the peak now, what about these other countries that could potentially improve their skins and make our industry more difficult?
Yeah, it's like my CEO is all about farming smarter. That's his whole rhetoric as we're talking through. The developing countries aren't as technologically savvy as what we are, so that's our competitive advantage at this point. But that the grant for the vaccine development we've actually received from the CRC Developing North Australia, and they've now gone. So we were trying to keep the viruses a bit hush-hush, and this is going to be our competitive edge for 5 years, and they've gone and advertised that through media outlets. So I'm now fielding questions from our third world compatriots going, so what are you doing with the Kunjun virus vaccine? What are you doing with the pox virus vaccine? And I sort of feel that we've actually lost our competitive edge through our governments disclosing it. Yeah. so yeah, we just have to remain on the ball. They're not planning on using any genetic improvement yet. Yeah.
Question, Pat? There's some people wandering around with microphones, so if you want to ask a question, put your hand up and grab them.
You talked about oversupply, and you talked about, when we spoke before, you said even though there's an oversupply now, there are more people getting into the market, starting up, and they're going to have crocs ready to roll soon. How do you see it working out, and how do you see that you're going to get past that?
I see a lot of people going out of business. There's a competing interest in there as well, where the large fashion brands don't want the market opened up, right? This is about exclusivity. This is about Paris Hiltons and Victoria Beckhams and people I don't know, and I don't know anyone that's got to spare $350,000 for a handbag. They want. This is an exclusive leather market product. And I think most people here in the room would have asked themselves the question very early on, well, wouldn't a blemish make a product unique? Because that's where we are. One blemish would make that unique. No one else could have that in the world. We're being told that that's not what the end market wants. So through that, there's no plan to develop alternative markets. That's right. So where it's now at is individual producers are having to form their own secondary markets. But because it's such an expensive exercise to farm crocs, it's got that exclusivity around it and all the rest of it. We're producers like everybody else. The chances of that succeeding to the point where, again, you're spending a couple of $1,000s on a wallet, is that where everyone's at? So, yeah, it's hard. I personally think a lot of people are going to go out of business. And there's a bigger conservation story in there as well, because there's a lot of, like those lower grade skins, so the Siamese crocodile, the New Guinea crocodile, who don't even make it into that skin pyramid, if they're not being uptaken into the market, their conservation strategy is gone. So then all of a sudden we've removed that economic driver to conserve habitat, to tolerate human crocodile conflict, to tolerate, competition with other livestock. And we're going to go back into retaliation killings and various other bits, so we're going to end up with another conservation problem. So it's something that the International Union of Crocodile... No, what is it called? Sorry, the Crocodile Specialist Group, IUCN Crocodile Specialist Group. It's something that we're think tanking a lot on at the moment, because the industry, we've helped the industry through conservation to develop its own, supply, but it's now essentially being turned around back onto the crocodile conservation in a negative way. So we're sort of getting them to think about their corporate social responsibility from a conservation perspective. It's a big debate at the moment, yeah. You've got a few curio things, you go to Darwin and go to Croc Cove or something like that, and I saw a gentleman here with a croc belt on before, so thank you. All of those kind of things, they all help, but yeah, it's not going to keep crocodile farmers in production for long.
Okay, Sally, up the back.
Yeah, hi.
That's it. I'll probably can find you a better price than $2 for an alternative to frozen chicken heads within the audience at the moment. But with your, just a technical
it's
question.
60% water.
Yeah.
We're shipping water.
It won't be 60% water, I can guarantee you. With your the research that you've been doing, has there been any difference between sexes in the quality of the leather? Because one of the advantages from many years ago when I went to Fog Dam as part of this of the journey into intensive agriculture was that you've got the ability to be able to manipulate sex through incubation temperature.
Yeah, and we still do. So it's a very good point. Crocodiles don't have sex hormones. That's all achieved through their incubation temperature. Now, we incubate everything at 32 degrees, not because of a sex determiner. It's actually the maximum embryo survival temperature. So obviously we get more eggs out of what we've got there, but it also happens to be the male biased temperature. So I think there's 80... I think I might have my stats around the wrong way there, actually. I think it's 86% males, and I think we've got 90% survivability. So anyway, 32 is where we incubate at for those reasons. Now, through my PhD, I did look at sex in terms of growth, and there was a 1 month difference between males reaching harvest size and females. Now, when you're talking about a 3.5 year production life, 1 month, yeah. Unfortunately, when I was doing my PhD, though, skin uptake was still good. No one was looking at skin quality parameters, and we haven't gone on to look at any skin quality parameters when it comes back to sex or the like at the moment. We're still just trying to figure out what's causing half of these defects. We only found out that this mosquito-borne virus was causing them 9th of December. What was that, 2016? So, and then, since then, just trying to find some funding avenues and the like. We've got some bacteria that, in aquaculture systems, those involved in aquaculture systems, Bacillus is well established to help with your denitrification cycle, and it outcompetes other bad or nasty bacteria. It produces keratinase, which eats our keratin, which degrades our skin, which creates long-term... So we're just at that point of really identifying where our critical features are. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Happy to shout. Sounds like we share the same areas in biosecurity.
Yeah.
I see with interest, but you're probably a little different in that you have a wild caught-based product, which we don't have to do. So do you have responsibilities to make sure that what isn't on farm goes back into a clean wild population? How do you manage that?
So we don't release anything back into the wild. Is that what you're asking? Do we?
Yeah. I see television shows of crocodile farmers in helicopters jumping into wild nests. I can't imagine what the biosecurity is from a farm that's got pathogens, as you say, back in the wild population.
So that's right. So we're bringing things onto the farm. We don't then release any animals back out into the wild. But what you do see on TV is the way it's done. It looks a lot more glamorous than what it is. There's a lot of green ants and mosquitoes and snakes and speargrass. So yeah, good luck to them. But when the eggs are brought back into the farms for incubation, they're washed and then they're put into incubators. Some people use vermiculite. I personally don't like that because I think it can actually create some microbial ecosystems within there that can detriment the eggs. But it's definitely a threat, and we don't know enough about that yet either. The other side of the argument is that some zoologists say that the bacteria and the organic matter on the eggs helps degrade the eggshell, which assists in hatching. So by us removing all of that and putting that in the incubator could actually be detrimental to our hatchability. So, yeah, two-way street there.
Sally, when you harvest these beasties, do you save the meat for retail consumption? And if you do, are you oversupplied in that? Or how much does that contribute to your meeting your cost of production?
The last time I heard the guys talk about it, the meat covered the abattoir costs. So the actual day-to-day running of the abattoir, the staff, the running of the freezers, those kind of things. The meat's worth about 5% of the value. Honestly, we need someone to come in and help with our meat marketing. A lot of it's going to dog food at the moment. Raw. What's one of those raw? There's a raw dog food at the moment. Yeah, I think they've got some crop product going into that. But we do have some cheap imports coming in from Papua New Guinea. They have dropped off recently. There are some disease concerns and antibiotic concerns about their use in those countries, which the regulators did listen to us about. But yeah, it's just such an insignificant part of the business. No one's really taken it, developed a market, and really, taken ownership over that side of the business. So if anyone's looking for a part-time job, full-time job. Got some really good ideas.
I mean, that's to me the obvious question. Occupational health and safety of your industry is really, really large, and staff training is absolutely important.
Yeah.
What type of tips could you give there to our industry?
Again, it's culture. I walked around for 15 years in bare feet, walking in and out of hatchling pens, and that's just not acceptable anymore, but I still like to walk into hatchling pens without shoes on. I've got more cuts on my feet, by the way, from scraping it on corrugated iron than I have actually from the crocodiles. But yeah, look, I think culture and vigilance and making sure that, what you're doing is practical and achievable. Crocodiles, obviously, because they're dangerous in nature, there is a respect there to begin with. I wasn't expecting this question. Give me a couple of seconds to think about it. Things like gloves are really important, and I find myself caught out all the time because the first thing you do when you catch a crocodile is to tape its jaws so that it doesn't bite you. You've got all these teeth that are outside the jaw. So if we farmed alligators, we'd be fine. But we don't. We farm crocs, and they've got protruding teeth. So if you then put your hand around that jaw and it death rolls in your hand gets sliced open. So it's not the bite, it's the other parts. Just getting people to have gloves on them all the time. With the larger animals, we use an electrical stunning device, which allows a lot safer handling of the animals and is also a lot, from a welfare perspective, allows a quicker recovery and is less stressful on the crocs. But, it's the basic farm safety. They're the risks. It's people driving tractors into walls and, forklifts into freezers. How do you stop that? And that doesn't matter whether you're pigs or poultry or aquaculture or crocodiles. How do you prevent those kind of things occurring to keep everyone safe? So you can have policies till the cows come home, and you can have, toolbox meetings in the morning and all the rest of it. I think it's just vigilance, and it's changing culture and getting people to know that shortcuts aren't the answer. Thank you.
The last question stole my thunder a bit. We might be ahead in the genetic game, but I'd certainly in the work health and safety manuals, I reckon you'd be well and truly advanced on us. But I can't get over how much of similarities between two very different industries, and whether it's welfare or whether it's health, marketing, obviously getting quality as well. So with that, I think it was a fantastic talk that you gave us and a great insight to your industry, and we wish you all the best in the further development, and one day we might be able to wear one of those bags in time. So if you can just do that, put your hands together for Sally.